This is the hour.
MOTOBOB here, just got in from riding the SV650, and as per usual I've jotted down everything I liked about it and didn't like on my phone, but first let's take a look at it.
Good world going bad. Rest of us are splitting hairs. It's a good world. Good world going bad.
Alright, let's have a little look at what we've got here. I should add that my bike is the old Kawasaki ER6N, which has been re-released this year as the Z650. So it's kind of similar to the SV, it's similar engine, similar features, similar price range, similar market that they're targeting. So that's my basis for comparison. So firstly, let's talk about how it looks. I think it's probably one of those bikes that looks better in real life than it does online or in photos. I saw on the MCM review of it that they said it was a bit plain looking. But I quite liked it. It's got some classic elements like the round headlight, and the general profile of it looks fairly classic, and I think it's a good balance of the two. I really like the little tail lights at the back. I think they look really nicely done, and overall looks good. But the defining difference between the two bikes, for me anyway, is that the Kawasaki is a parallel twin and the SV is a V-twin. It makes a much richer, much more bassy, much more satisfying sound. But overall to ride it's kind of similar, so plenty of torque in the low to mid range, which is great for around town and between the lights, but you really have to wind it on a bit to get it to take off. Both my ER6N and the SV that I rode vibrate quite a lot between sort of 4,000 or 5,000 revs. You can feel it through the foot pegs and through the bars a bit, but there's just something about knowing that it's a V-twin and the kind of lovely rich sound that you're getting from the exhaust that makes it a bit more tolerable, I think. It didn't really bother me as much as it does on my bike. Maybe it's in my mind. General riding position was good. The seat's quite firm, but it's low enough that around town it's not much of a struggle. Pretty comfortable. I did a little bit of motorway riding because we were right next to the M4, so I just went between a couple of junctions, and yeah, it seemed totally fine. It was a nice bike to sit on. It's very narrow. That's what a lot of people would say about the SV, even compared to my ER6, which is not a big bike. The tank's noticeably narrower, so for some people that might be a real selling factor perhaps, if you don't want to handle a big bike. And certainly around the traffic I did a little bit of filtering and it felt fairly nimble between cars. Another thing I liked was the dash. It's got a full LCD dash that's got obviously your revs and your speed, but a gear indicator, fuel indicator. It also tells you how many miles left you've got, and then all sorts of other little bits. I found it nice and compact but easy to read, so that was a nice feature. One thing that I'll touch on that I read about on the Suzuki site was this low rev assist. I don't really know a great deal about how it works, but the idea is that when you're riding at lower revs between lights and around town, it gives you a little bit of help to stop you stalling it and stop it kind of getting bogged down in the lower revs. I don't think it's something you can turn on and off, so it's hard to kind of compare whether it works or not, but what I will say is almost every test ride I go on, or when I hire a bike, within the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes, especially if I'm straight into London traffic, there's a good chance I'll stall it. In fact, the last 2 test rides, I know that I've certainly stalled it fairly early doors. But I didn't stall it once today, so I think that might be some kind of evidence that the low rev assist works. So on to some of the stuff that I didn't like so much. The first thing I noticed was that the bite point was quite close to the bars on the clutch, so I had a little bit of difficulty getting it between the gears at first. And I think that the reason for that is that it's not an adjustable clutch lever. So the brake lever is adjustable, the clutch isn't. If you pull it in with all 4 fingers, it changes gear nice and smoothly, but if you use 2 fingers and you got 2 resting on the grip, I couldn't quite get it all the way in, and that meant that every now and again I might miss a gear shift. So probably something you get used to with time, and you could argue it's quite easy to change the levers for some adjustable ones and they're not expensive, but that's just something that I found was a little bit tricky when I first set off. Another thing that I noticed that as soon as I got on the bike was that the seat is relatively firm. It's quite a nice bucket shape, so it feels quite snug, but it does feel a little bit tough. So if anyone's done more miles on one and can tell me in the comments below, I'd love to hear. But it is a little bit on the firm side. I don't want to go on about it in every single review I've done as well, but most of the riding that myself and my wife do is 2-up. We commute on my bike nearly every day and we do trips and stuff. And again, the SV didn't look like a great bike for pillions, so if that's a consideration, then perhaps look at some other bikes, but it's a really small seat on there. Just a small leather strap to hold on to. And then just a few minor things, like I will probably switch the exhaust on this bike. One, because I don't think it looks that great. The whole bike looks good, but the can with that little panel on it, I don't think it looks particularly stylish. But also it sounds great when you're at fairly low speed, but as soon as you get up to speed on the motorway, it's pretty muffled, and actually you couldn't really hear the sound of the exhaust there, so possibly swap that. The mirrors are great for visibility, but again, I think on that style of bike, maybe some little bar ends might make it look a little bit better, but I say that about nearly every bike. Brakes are good, but they didn't bite that much straight away. It's quite a new bike that I rode, so 80 miles on the clock, I think, when I tested it. So maybe that would change as the brakes bed in a little bit, but yeah, they didn't have that initial bite that you get on something like the ER6. And then the last thing that I'll mention is that when I was filtering, I don't think the range of the full lock on the steering is quite as wide as the R6. It's still good enough, and I was able to kind of nip in and out of the traffic, but it didn't seem quite as wide. So that's some quick thoughts on the SV. Overall, really enjoyed it. I think in summary, if I was going to think about perhaps changing my old ER6M for a Z650 or an SV650, I'd probably go with the SV just for the sake of getting a V-twin engine. I think it sounds way better than the parallel twin. So overall, pretty great bike. If you've got any questions about it, leave them in the comments. And if you want to see more reviews like this, click subscribe.